Welcome to Globalweekly News, serial number 48. Comrades and friends, first let us see the situation in Sri Lanka. Severe economic crisis is prevailing in Sri Lanka since last year. This has aggravated food insecurity. 1 out of 3 school-going children don't have morning breakfast. Out of 45 lakhs school-going students, the condition of 14 lakh students is only like this. This is revealed by the chairman of the government committee. According to UNICEF, United Nations International Children's Education Fund, UNICEF, 28% of the population is facing moderate food insecurity. 66,000 face severe food insecurity. In 2019, average Sri Lankan's family spent 32% of their income for food. Now 2 out of 5 families spend 75% of their income for food. Without any rise in wages of workers, cost of living has doubled in a short term. United Nations gives the following information. Unorganized workers are the worst affected. 86% of families have reduced their food consumption. Even some families are starving. Nearly 50 lakh Sri Lankans, including 2 lakh people of Colombo, eat less food. Even for that, they borrow money. 56,000 children below 5 years of age are affected by severe malnutrition. Sri Lanka Health Movement says that 22% of people need food aid. 50% children at the age of 10 drop out of school in 5th standard itself. Dropouts will further increase due to transport bottlenecks and food insecurity. Many children attend school once in a week. Comrades and friends, we have seen the situation in Sri Lanka. Now we are going to New York to see the movement against increase in house rents. High rents in New York City. In New York City, the residents of rented houses struggled for many decades for a stable rent and succeeded in this in 1969. Comparatively, they pay less. Rent Guidelines Board, appointed by the mayor of the city, decide upon the annual increase in the rent. Landowners and speculators, they impose brutal rents. Even for one-bed apartment in New York City, this month the rent is about $4,000. On 20th May, thousands of residents of rented houses demonstrated in Brooklyn against the hike in the house rent. This was organized by the New York State Tenants' Rights Group, Housing Justice for All, and the Rent Justice Coalition, which organizes rent-stabilized tenants. Wages have not risen. Poverty growth rate in New York City is double that of the national average. A final vote regarding the rents will take place on 21st June in the Rent Guidelines Board. The present mayor in the elections in 2021 received liberal electoral funds from real estate developers. Let us wait and see the outcome of the board. So, there are two groups of people who are occupying rented houses. One group is unionized and they have fought for decades and stabilized their rent somewhat. But others are subject to the brutal rents of the landowners. Comrades and friends, we often say that capitalism or imperialism is barbaric in nature. We see the economic sanctions, how they affect the targeted countries now. Economic sanctions. According to a study published by CEPR, Center for Economic and Policy Research, Washington-based organization, economic sanctions, often illegally imposed, have a lasting negative impact on the populations in the targeted countries and almost never achieve their stated goals. Sanctions imposed by individual countries without the approval of the UN Security Council are known as unilateral coercive measures. The study finds that they affect the living conditions of the majority population of the targeted countries by making them poorer. There are 54 countries from across the world today which are under some kind of economic sanctions. Some of these countries, such as Cuba, Iran, North Korea, have been under sanctions for decades. The study notes that in the 1960s, less than 4% countries in the world were subjected to sanctions imposed by the United States, European Union, or United Nations. Now the figure is 27%. That means 27% of the countries in the world, that is about 54 countries, are subject to sanctions. Individual or entity specific sanctions have also been on the rise. For example, from Barack Obama administration to Joe Biden's, the number of such sanctioned entities rose from 544 to over 1,100. The study has established that in all the countries targeted by sanctions, the economies declined, per capita income has declined or stagnated, poverty has risen, inequality has risen, international trade has reduced, child mortality and undernourishment have increased, life expectancy has lowered, and human rights get reduced. The ability of the targeted countries to deliver basic goods and services to the people gets limited due to economic decline. Iran has been under US sanctions since 1979. The United Nations also imposed sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program from 2006, which ended in 2015, following the signing of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The US sanctions, which were released between 2015 and 2018, were reimposed when the Donald Trump administration decided to unilaterally withdraw from the Joint Plan. Sanctions impacted the health sector in Iran as well, causing shortages of 73 medicines, out of which at least 32 were declared as essential by the World Health Organization. The US and the European Union have confiscated or seized $960 crore assets of Afghanistan following Taliban's return to power in 2021. The US has imposed numerous sanctions on Venezuela since 2017, which have led to a fall in the country's overall imports by 91% by 2020. The most significant impact was on the import of food, which declined by 78%. Venezuela is a country dependent on import of food, and if that import is affected, it will be forced to starve. The intention of United States, European Union imposing harsh sanctions is to rouse the people of the targeted countries to bring down their governments. They do not like Cuba, the socialist country, since they are afraid of growing influence of socialist thought in US, etc. Comrades, Cuba is extending solidarity to Palestine. We will see that now. Cuba's Latin American School of Medicine, ELAM, marked the 75th anniversary of Nakba, the catastrophe which the Palestinians faced, highlighting its long-standing resistance against imperialism. In addition to students and professors from ELAM, that is Latin American School of Medicines, the event to express solidarity with the Palestinian cause had participation from different sectors of the Cuban society, such as members of the National Assembly, members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and members of mass organizations. During the event, Palestinian students presented the traditional dance. A video on the situation of the Palestinian people was screened, and the Palestinian ambassador to Cuba, Dr. Akram Sanjan, gave a speech on the state of the Palestinian struggle. Comrades, now we are going to African country, Sudan. The agreement on a short-term ceasefire and humanitarian arrangements was signed on 20th May by the representatives of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF. They were all friends and partners in a coup, in a plot against the government, who have been fighting each other now. Since 15th April, they have been fighting each other. That is Sudanese Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces. Both are fighting each other since 15th April. By now, the death toll of civilians caught in the crossfire had climbed to 850, while nearly 4,000 others were injured, said the Sudanese Doctors Union, which is extending humanitarian aid. US and Saudi Arabia jointly facilitated the peace negotiations in the Saudi city of Jeddah since 6th May. A monitoring and coordination committee is to be established, comprising 3 each from Sudanese Armed Forces, Rapid Support Forces, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. While welcoming the ceasefire agreement, Sudanese Communist Party told that this 12-person committee is insufficient to monitor and ensure compliance of the same. It does not include a single representative of the civilians who have been very much affected most in this conflict. The resistance committees, which have been working throughout the fighting to help people access essentials for survival, should be in charge of receiving the international aid and ensuring its proper distribution. The number of people in need of humanitarian assistance has increased to 2.47 crores. Successful implementation of the ceasefire, successful implementation of the ceasefire agreement would bring peace to Sudan, but this depends on the will of the fighting forces themselves, because they are represented in that monitoring committee. A regionally constituted peacekeeping force should have been deployed under the flag of the African Union, East African Union, that is 8 countries. But African Union is absent from the negotiations. Sudan Communist Party has warned against allowing the US and Saudi Arabia to monopolize the peace process, because you cannot depend on US, which will be always give a call for peace. US is a warmongering country. It's an imperialist country. Therefore, Sudan Communist Party is warning like that. Comrades, we go to European country, Belgium, where a draconian bill is pending. Government of Belgium is proposing a parliamentary bill which seeks to ban rioters from taking part in protests. Who are the rioters and who are not the rioters? Who can decide? Who will decide? Trade unions and leftist parties, such as the Workers' Party of Belgium, say that the bill could be used or misused to target their members and other activists by branding them as rioters. Belgium workers have been intensifying mobilizations demanding wages at par with the inflation to cope with the ongoing cost of living crisis. Currently, a major workers' protest is underway in retail stores and supermarkets against the company's anti-worker, anti-union policies. Trade unions have called for a major mobilization in Brussels on 22nd May in solidarity with the struggling workers. Comrades, now we are going to see health aspects. People's Health Assembly, then finally World Health Assembly. People's Health Assembly now. A carnival means a festival with celebrations. A carnival of many colors, many backgrounds, many different political perspectives, sharing experiences, discussing how people's health is shaped, exploring how healthcare can be transformed. This is the People's Health Assembly. This is the top direction setting forum for the People's Health Movement. The first People's Health Assembly was held in Bangladesh in December 2000. World Health Assembly, which met in 1979, set the target of health for all by the year 2000. People's Charter for Health was also adopted in the Assembly. There was also a strong indignation or condemnation of the World Bank's involvements in health. The second People's Health Assembly was held in Ecuador in July 2005. There was prominent participation of indigenous communities from Central and South America and beyond. The third People's Health Assembly was held in July 2012 in South Africa. A ringing call to action was adopted. In 2018, the fourth assembly was held in Bangladesh. A key feature of this gathering was a focus on 6 themes: health systems, environment, gender, food, migration and peace, and trade. The fifth People's Health Assembly is going to be held this year in Colombia of South America. The first new international economic order was adopted in 1974 by the United Nations under pressure from Group 77 and China. The Alma Ata is a place in Kazakhstan. The Alma Ata Declaration on Primary Health Care in 1978 affirmed that economic and social development based on new international economic order is of basic importance to the fullest attainment of health for all and to the reduction of the gap between the health status of the developing and the developed countries. Imperialist North opposes the new order. They want patent rights, privatization and marketization of services, utilities and infrastructure. Comrades, lastly we are going to see World Health Assembly. In Geneva of Switzerland, the World Health Organization, WHO, is preparing for its 76th World Health Assembly, which kicks off on 21st May 2023 this year and is set to wrap up on 30th May of this year. The 10-day conference will see participation from delegations from across the world. Activists, civil society organizations and journalists have also arrived in Geneva. WHO, World Health Organization Director General Tedros announced the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, we all know that World Health Organization played a key role in supporting health systems around the world as they struggled under pressure. World Health Organization is facing fund problem. World Health Organization was established 75 years ago by the United Nations. The principle of one country, one vote was meant to give equal footing to all members. Once, over the past decades, funding for the World Health Organization from government has stagnated. This has pushed the organization towards donor funding, primarily from philanthropic capitalist organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Currently, as much as 80% of the WHO's funding depends on donors. The 76th Conference of World Health Assembly will discuss on financial position, health situation in the occupied Palestine and re-emerging polio in the world, etc. Barbaric capitalism is not interested in strengthening public health or providing health for all. This is all this week's Global Weekly News, serial number 48. See you next week, comrades. Lal Salam.